we ask in the Saviour's name. Amen. Verses 2 and 3, we read that Peter says, after speaking of himself in verse 1, being a fellow elder, he says in verses 2 and 3, feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being examples to the flock. There was once a small rural village in the mountaintops of the United States, and it was surrounded by hills, but also surrounded by these kind of tall oak trees. Of course, the States is known for these tall oak trees that are meters high, and this little village was surrounded by them. In this little village, as is typical at times, there was a group of old retired individuals, and they were unofficially the mainstays of the village. And one day the news reached the village that a massive storm was going to sweep through the village. And so you can imagine all of those who were now growing up in this village, those who were out working and had young families and families to think about, etc. They were really panic-stricken. They were unsure how their homes were going to survive, about their livestock. It was, of course, a rural community. But the old retired men, they remained extremely calm. Because, you see, they had faced a storm like this, essentially exactly like this, just a few decades previously. And so they knew exactly what to expect. They knew the strong points of the village. They knew the weak points of the village. They knew where the river was going to overflow, or essentially, they knew where to place the sandbags at the river. And so the storm, it came and it passed with minimal hurt and harm. These men were a source of calm, wisdom, and strength throughout. And like the tall oaks surrounded the village, and in a sense protected part of the village from the storm, these men then received the nickname the tall oaks of the village until their dying days. And folks, this kind of work, this kind of labour, is essentially what we have depicted in the eldership of any New Testament congregation here in 1 Peter. It is to have that influence over the people, as it speaks here in verse 3, not as lords over the heritage, but by being examples to the flock, being that calming, being that soothing, being that consoling influence over the flock which God has placed them. Now, Peter's dealt with a lot of matters, and we have seen that in the first 4 chapters. He has dealt with their salvation in chapter 1, how they were elect and how they were chosen, how they were foreordained. In chapter 1, verse 22, he has dealt with their sanctification, how God uses hurt to enable them to purify their souls through further obedience to the truth. He has spoken of them as stones in chapter 2. He has spoken of their submission in various aspects of life, chapters 2 and 3. A number of weeks ago, we thought of their suffering in chapter 4. If any man suffer as a Christian. And even amongst all of that in chapter 4, we also saw that he has brought to them the concept of the second coming as a source of comfort and consolation for these hurting Christians. The Lord is at hand. Be ye therefore, because Christ is returning, this is how you are to behave. So we have seen that he has dealt with a lot of ground, all with the design of helping these hurting believers. Whether it has been sharpening their eyes heavenward, or else focusing their minds or their eyes in a more manward sense, how they live out their lives with their fellow man, Peter has sought to be a blessing, to encourage, to help these struggling Christians. And so it is only fitting then that in chapter 5 that he turns to the role of the shepherds or the elders of the congregation. Now, they're not called shepherds here in these first few verses, I would confess that. But they're certainly set forth as shepherds because they're told to feed the flock of God. They are essentially told to shepherd the flock. Now, it's very interesting in verse 1. Peter, before he exhorts these believers in verses 2 and 3, these elders of the various congregations, he says, "Who am a fellow elder among you." And I think that's very interesting. Peter does not set himself up in a position of primacy over these elders, although he was an apostle, yes. But he describes himself, or he sees himself, as a fellow elder. He was one of them. He was not lording it even over these elders, but he was one of these elders. He was a fellow elder. He has witnessed the sufferings of Christ, verse 1. He one day would be a partaker of these blessings as well. And so what you have here is essentially one elder, Peter himself, verse 1. Then in verses 2 and 3, encouraging these fellow elders. And in encouraging these elders, he's essentially telling them in how you live out your work, and how you live out your life, and how you labour for Christ amongst the congregation, ultimately encourage these believers, these suffering Christians. Help them as they're hurting. You see, elders are not given to lord it over the flock, verse 3. They are given, verse 2, to lead the flock. As the shepherd, as he goes before, as he is an example in the natural realm, as he gives direction and guidance to the earthly flock, to a literal flock of sheep, as he feeds the sheep, as he cares for the sheep, as he tends to the sheep and all of their needs and all of their wants. So that is to be the type of an individual that an elder is to be. And of course, you as a Christian, you have your part to play in this, in the sense that you can derive tremendous help from our elders. But you must go to them and you must ask them for counsel and for guidance. Elders are not going to be, as I put it to someone recently, elders should be gentlemen. They will only go where they are wanted. And so if you want help, if you want counsel, the eldership of the church, obviously myself as a fellow elder, we are here to help, we are here to guide, we trust, we are here to console. But at times that needs your input. Sometimes we don't know if you're hurting. Sometimes we don't know if there's a particular issue. And at times sometimes people can treat oversight with suspicion. And sometimes there can be a break between elders and people, between shepherds and sheep. And folks, that should never happen in a New Testament congregation. Now, elders have their part to play in that and how they conduct themselves, but also you as sheep generally, you have a part to play in that as well. Elders are not here to be treated with suspicion, to kind of just to kind of see them there. They're here for your help, folks. God, in his wisdom, in his providence, the chief shepherd, verse 4, has given elders, verses 1 through 3, for your blessing, for your help, and for your encouragement. And this is what we have here in these verses. Elders encouraging the hurting. And that's what we want to look at today. Elders encouraging the hurting. I want you to see firstly here the relationship of the elder. The relationship of the elder. The elder is to have a particular and a unique relationship with his flock, just like a shepherd does with his sheep. Verse 2, feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. He's essentially calling these elders, verse 1, shepherds in verse 2. As I've said, he doesn't really call them shepherds, but he doesn't have to. He tells them to feed the flock of God. Now, immediately people think, well, this is just for ministers, but it's not. The term feed here, it's a very, very graphic term in the New Testament, and it really has the idea of perform or conduct the work of a shepherd. What does a shepherd do? Yes, he feeds his flock, but that's not the only thing he does. He leads the flock. He goes before the flock. He manages the flock. He oversees the flock. He tends to the flock. He guides the flock. And so in telling them to feed the flock of God which is among you, he's essentially telling them, as the shepherd does in the natural, so you are in the spiritual. Now think about the animal under the shepherd's care. This is something that the elder must bear in mind. He is called, verse 2, to feed the flock of God. God uses the imagery of God's people here, and he uses the imagery of a sheep. It's very interesting. He doesn't call us what other animals, there are other animals in the Bible, like dinosaurs, like birds. He doesn't call us all of these animals, dogs. He calls us sheep. Philip Keller has a wonderful book in Psalm 23, of course, all about the shepherd and the sheep, and he says it's no accident that God has chosen to call us sheep. Sheep do not take care of themselves, as some might think. They require more than any other class of livestock, endless attention and meticulous care. You see, sheep are wayward. Peter says this in chapter 2, verse 25. You're gone astray like a lost sheep. He literally said this a few chapters ago. You're gone astray. You're just like a lost sheep. Isaiah says we are gone astray just like the lost sheep throughout the Bible. Now that's very interesting because sheep are wayward animals by nature. Very often when they get lost out in the fields, as those of you who are amongst us who work with them, you'll know, very seldom do they find themselves by their own instinct, they find themselves back home. Now that's very interesting. Many of you have dogs and cats. And of course they can get lost, and they can get lost for days even, and then all of a sudden they just find their way back home. But sheep are naturally wayward. Sheep are wayward, but sheep also are weak. Whenever it falls, it becomes defenseless, it becomes helpless. I'm sure you've seen that, where they just kind of kick their legs in the air. Now you think about that, folks. Virtually every other animal in the animal kingdom has some mechanism inbuilt within it that it can defend itself. Cats scratch, dogs bark, even skunks stink. God has created that many animals that they have some form of way whereby they can defend themselves, but a sheep is absolutely helpless. Is it any wonder in Acts chapter 20 when Paul was speaking to the elders at Ephesus, he told them, as soon as I go away, there will be wolves that will enter into the flock, not sparing the sheep. Because he realizes as God's people, they are helpless, that we are defenseless. And yes, whilst we're wayward and whilst we are weak, sheep, of course, are very worthwhile animals. They're valuable, I'm sure, today, although I'm not sure what the sheep market's like at this particular time. But in Bible times, they were certainly valuable. Valuable for wool, value, of course, for eating. They are actually one of the most valuable animals in all of Scripture. A couple of sheep a man might have, and well, he might be able to eke out a living in Bible times for the rest of his day. Now, I tell you all of this, folks, to remind you that the Bible likens you to a sheep. And that means at times that you will go wayward. At times in your Christian life, no matter how strong you might feel today, there will come a tomorrow whenever you will be weak. We're not always at our strongest. And that's why God has ordained and God has set forth the need for shepherds, the need for elders over a flock. Because you will wander as a Christian. You will have certain tendencies where you will be weak at some times and strong at other times. And that is why God gives elders to oversee, to guide, and direct. They're there for your help. Just as the sheep needs directed by the shepherd, so God has given elders in his wisdom, in his infinite wisdom, to lead you, to guide you, to help you, to direct you, to feed you. Perhaps there's someone here this morning and you're just not where you think you should be or where you once were. Never think that because you're a sheep that you're worthless to God or to Christ's church. Do you remember what Jesus said himself in Luke chapter 12? Speaking to people, speaking to individuals, he said, the very hairs, in verse 7, of your head, they are numbered. And ye are of more value than many sparrows. The little sparrow that falls at times to the ground. And of course, God takes great care to ensure its safety and its restoration. He said, you're of much more value than many sparrows falling to the ground. You're worthwhile to God. And part of the way in which you then are helped by God, as set forth in his word, folks, is the ministry of elders. So when we think about the relationship of the elders, you must remember that you're shepherds over sheep. But also sheep this morning, you must remember that you are a sheep and shepherds are there and they're given for your help and for your betterment as a Christian. The relationship of the elder, the animal under the shepherd's care, but what about the attitude of the shepherd's care, verse 2? They were called to feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. You'll notice here in verses 2 and verse 3, he tells them what they shouldn't be, and then he tells them what they should be. He speaks here of a want to do it in verse 2, not by constraint, but willingly. This is not something that the elder should be forced to do. Now, I know at times there is a choice to be made, and of course we have elections, etc. But ultimately, individuals, they let their name go forward in a sense that they are willing to do the work if God so calls them to do that work. And so when you think about it here, there must be a want to do it, a desire to do it, to care for the sheep, to console the sheep, to protect the sheep. There must be a willingness to do it as well, verse 2. Not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. The elder is not in the eldership because of what he may or may not get out of it. Whether that be financial, or whether that be spiritual in terms of relationally. No. There must be a ready, a willing mind to do no matter what. Whether there is personal gain or even personal loss. And at times that can happen in God's work. You go and you try to help and you try and intervene in a certain situation. And of course you end up maybe things don't pan out and things fall out. And at times that can even be a detriment to the elder. Whether I'm going to gain out of this or whether I'm going to lose out of this. Not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. He speaks here of a want to do it and a willingness to do it. He speaks of a way to do it, verse 3. Neither as being lords over God's heritage. The elder is not to run around and abuse his authority. And so often, you can see this in especially in kind of charismatic circles. And you can see this all over America, and of course even I would go as far as to say here in Northern Ireland, where pastors, they're put up on a pedestal and they have a celebrity status, and then they just abuse their position of authority. That's not how the elder is to be. Not to run around as if they own the show and run the show or abuse the God-given authority that they have. No, there's a way to do it. The way to do it, of course, is to imitate, verse 4, the great shepherd, the chief shepherd. Is to follow his example in how he led, and how he directed, and yes, at times how he corrected his wandering sheep. The story is told by Toscanini, the famous conductor, and he had an orchestra and they were going to perform at this particular evening. And of course, an orchestra, and then they had a very well-known soloist. And so he was consoling, and he was telling the soloist what was required of her, and then he was telling the orchestra what was required of them. And the soloist responded in this way: "Well, it doesn't matter. I'm the star of the show, and I'll do whatever I want." Toscanini simply replied, "Well, madam, in this performance there are no stars." You see, he knew that it took the soloist as well as the orchestra to come together, to harmonize together, to make a successful performance. And in a New Testament church, folks, that is what is required. It takes shepherds and sheep to be bonded together, to be knit together, so that shepherds can perform their role in encouraging and leading the flock, and that sheep can benefit from the shepherds performing their role. And that is why we've looked at the relationship of the elder. It's so important that we think about the elder as a shepherd over sheep, but also sheep under the care of the shepherds. The relationship of the elder. What about the responsibility of the elder? Verse 2. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. It's very obvious here that part of the role of the shepherd or the elder is management. Feed the flock of God. As I've said, that's an all-encompassing term. It's not just the idea of teaching or preaching. You think about the shepherd feeding. No, there's much more than tending the sheep than just feeding them a few times a day. And those who look after sheep, you'll know that. This term suggests much more than that. And of course, when we read in verse 2 again, taking the oversight thereof. He is to oversee. He is, as the original has the idea of being a bishop, of overseeing, of managing the flock. Yes, it is by example, but it also means that in general he oversees, he manages the flock. You see, every church cannot be made up of just sheep. And it also cannot be made up of just shepherds. A congregation, a biblical congregation, is a balanced congregation. It can't have too many sheep and it can't have too many shepherds. You ever see a flock of sheep and there's nobody leading them, there's nobody guiding them? Seconds pass and they're gone, they're lost. Those who move sheep, and you have sheep, and of course we've all seen that in these parts. Well, it takes someone to stand in front of them, usually someone behind them, maybe someone opening a gate. It takes very obvious direction and counsel and guidance. And if you just let the sheep and kind of think to yourself, well, they'll move on their own, they will not. It's not going to happen, folks, and you know this. No, they need managed. And a balanced congregation will not just have all sheep or all shepherds, they will have both. And this is actually part of your encouragement, child of God, as a Christian, as they give direction, as they give discipline and correction and guidance on a weekly basis, especially in their private deliberations with you. That can either help you in your hurt or else prevent you from further hurt. And we must remember this, folks. Sometimes whenever an elder gives a little piece of advice, or a minister, or whoever, individuals, they respond in a hurt way. Now, we have a duty in how we do that, I understand that. But whenever someone gives you a piece of advice or asks a question, it's for your betterment. Sometimes a shepherd has, Psalm 23 puts it, yes, sometimes he uses a staff, but sometimes he uses the rod of correction. And a private piece of counsel or advice is not to be taken in the wrong way. It's simply to be taken for your betterment. It's to prevent you from further hurt. If an elder sees a particular individual going down a certain route in their lives, and he gives you a very gentle piece of private correction or counsel, the chances are that he's thought and prayed about that long and hard. He hasn't just done it on a whim. And you can see here, therefore, again, your responsibility, that as the shepherd manages the flock, he's doing it for the betterment of the flock and for the sheep in the flock. And so one of his roles is management. But another responsibility he has is ministry. Verse 2. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof. This phrase, taking the oversight thereof, really it has the idea in the original of discharging an office, occupying an office. Actually being actively engaged in the ministry of that office. To put it very simply, folks, and directly, he's not sitting back and just occupying a seat of authority. He's actively engaged in discharging oversight, in taking, in occupying in the oversight thereof. Privately helping people, privately being there, privately giving advice, privately giving counsel, at times publicly even as well. The elder, folks, is not an armchair general sitting around telling everybody else what to do. He is an on-site CO. He leads from the front, in the midst of the battle. Whenever anybody occupies any form of office in this congregation, whether it be elder, or whether it be minister, or deacon, or Sunday school teacher, or children's worker, or whatever, it is an office or a work of ministry. You're engaged to serve, you're engaged in work. It's not to sit back. No, it's to be actively involved, and especially the elder. That's why it speaks about his example here, about how he is to be an example to the flock. He's to be leading from the front in the midst of the battle. An old preacher went to hear one of his young students that he was teaching. This is a Bible college setting one Sunday. And the old minister, he said, "Well, I suppose you're very tired after that." And the young man, he quipped and he said, "No, I don't get tired at all after I preach." The wise old man simply said, "Well, son, remember this. Whenever there's preaching going on, there's always somebody who's getting tired. And it's either you or them." And he made a very good point. Perhaps if he had been more engaged in what he was actually doing throughout the week, then he would have been tired. And hopefully the people not so much. His responsibility is one of management and ministry, but it is, and folks, I really, and especially the elders, I want you to really listen carefully to this. One of the responsibilities of the eldership is the maturity of the flock. It's maturity. Verse 2, feed the flock of God which is among you. As we've seen, this has the idea of lead and feed, but also shepherd. The idea, therefore, as you feed a little lamb, is that eventually it'll become a sheep. We know this. A flock of little lambs don't stay lambs forever. No, they develop, they mature, and they become either ewes or rams. Whenever the little lambs come, and lambing season has come, and I suppose nearly almost gone now, you might say, and it's lovely to look out at the little lambs in the field, but the reality is they don't stay like that forever. Now, the little lamb and the sheep has a responsibility to eat, that's right, but the shepherd also has a responsibility to lead and to feed and to guide as well. So there's mutual responsibility there. But ultimately, yes, it is part of the responsibility of the elder, of the shepherd, to see the flock of God mature, develop, grow, feed the flock of God, which is among you. And in all your hurts, child of God, one of the tasks of the elder is to see that in all of your hurts that it doesn't mutilate you as a believer, but rather it matures you. You're going through a difficult time, you're struggling, you feel yourself welling up in bitterness and in anger, perhaps bitterness towards God or towards God's people. My encouragement for you is this: speak to an elder. Speak to an elder. Speak to myself, obviously, but there are other elders here, as we have seen and as we know. Perhaps you have a more intimate relationship with one and not the other, and you have their confidence and that kind of thing. The church needs leaders who serve and servants who lead. I read that this week, and I think that's so important. Leaders with a servant's attitude, and yes then, servants who are given to lead. The elders are here, folks, to see you grow in grace, to see you as perhaps a little lamb of the flock, whether you're young or whether you're a child or whether you've even just recently come to faith, or perhaps you're just not progressing as you feel you should and even as you feel as you could. The elders are here for your maturation. They are here for your growth and your development. And yes, part of that is feeding, part of that is my responsibility, but part of that is how you deal with the issues of life and all its changes. The relationship of the elder, the responsibility of the elder. But then lastly, what about the reward of the elder? Verse 4. When the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. Sometimes people wrongly look on with envy, or even with the green-eyed monster of jealousy, and they look on at the elder or even potentially the pastor, and they like the idea of the authority that they have. The reality is, folks, that nothing could be further from the truth. Certainly being a minister and also an elder, there's an absolute massive weight of responsibility, and you do not enter into it lightly. James 3 verse 1 tells us, "My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation." All of the things that I have mentioned to you this morning, in a general sense, every elder will have to give an account before God of the maturity of the flock, the ministry that he has been engaged in the flock. All of these things, all of the work and the labour, in a general sense, elders will give an account. My brethren, be not many masters, because if you fail in this, there will be a greater condemnation in terms of your Christian life come the day of judgment. But like it is with every Christian, the prospect of being rewarded for faithful and diligent service is there as well. And so verse 4, Peter, he rounds up this small section on the eldership by saying, remember this, there's going to be a chief shepherd. And one day he's going to appear. And he's going to inspect. And he's going to examine the flock. And he's going to inspect and examine your work, your life, your labour. And verse 4, if you have laboured faithfully and diligently, yes, not perfectly, none of us can labour perfectly, but faithfully and diligently, you're going to receive a crown of glory, which fadeth not away. Brother, all those times you've sought to privately draw alongside a hurting Christian. All those times you've been forbearing. You felt that you should have spoken, but you didn't speak, and you've held back, and you've seen it played out that was the right thing to do. All of those daily and weekly and monthly and yearly decisions, there's going to be a reward. You're going to receive a crown of glory, and it's going to be given to you by the chief shepherd himself, Christ. He's going to appear. He's going to be revealed. That's really what it means there. Speaking of the second coming, he will appear, and Jesus will come to reward his servants, whether it be noon or night. And as we saw a few weeks ago, as the Lord is at hand, in the opening few verses of chapter 4, as this should motivate you elders, it should motivate every single Christian that one day the chief shepherd will appear and reward you for being faithful and diligent as a sheep of this flock. You know, there's a key verse, I think, that sums up all that we've been looking at this morning, and it's found in Hebrews chapter 13. And in Hebrews 13, verse 17, we read this: "Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves." So there's the exhortation to the sheep. Avail yourself of the ministry of the shepherds. Why? "For they watch for your souls as they that must give an account, that they might do it with joy, not grief, for that is unprofitable for you." And you see the mutual relationship there. Yes, obey those that have the rule over you and submit yourselves. Come to the elder, etc. Because he's conscious that he has been called of God to watch over your soul. And one day he's going to have to give an account of how he has watched over your soul. And so therefore, elder, do it with joy, not in a grudging sense, not with grief, because that is not going to bless and help anybody. For that is unprofitable to you. Elders encouraging a hurting people. And we've come back to this subject today because it's here, folks. But we've looked at this in the context of all of our responsibilities in terms of oversight, in terms of members, that there is help available there, not just in the Lord and in his word, but as his faithful servants dispense their responsibilities, there's help available. And I trust that we will all avail of that and do our duty accordingly. We'll close our time this morning by singing the words of hymn 616.